Welcome to EDAB video number 5. Data analysis and business intelligence made easy with Excel power tools. And in this episode, we got to talk about visualizing data in Excel. Tables, charts, conditional formatting, and dashboards? You bet. We can do it all in Excel. Even though in the working world it's common to see a table of data like this, this is what we really want. For charts, even though Microsoft offers lots of chart junk options, we're always going to go simple and effective with our charts. If we need to visualize our table data with a heat map, conditional formatting comes to the rescue. And of course, when we build our dashboard, we'll use visualizations when we want a quick impression and tables of data when we want to compare precise numbers. Here's the start file that you can download in the links below the video. There's also the finished file. That's the file completed after the video. And there are some amazing PDF notes with everything you need to know in written form about visualizing data. Here are the topics for our video. And as always, below each video, now this is Excel Basics 1, but below our video, if you look for that Show More button, you click, and there's a time hyperlink table of contents. If you like what you see, click that subscribe button and the bell icon. The definition of data analysis and business intelligence: convert raw data into useful information for decision makers. But guess what? Data analysis yields numbers and visualizations. This is information presented in a table. This is information presented visually. Both are the end result of data analysis. Why tables? Because we want details of the numbers. Tables of numbers help make precise comparisons. We can precisely compare Majestic, Butte, and Quad because we have the exact numbers. Why visualize? A quick visual impression. A picture tells 1,000 words, and we can make relative comparisons quickly. We may not know the exact numbers for Quad and Majestic, Butte, but we can clearly see that Quad is much bigger. With visualizations, we can instantly see Quad is the biggest and Carlota is the second biggest. Here's a table with all the detail, but it's hard to see the pattern or trend. Here's the perfect visualization for pattern and trends over time, the line chart. We can clearly see up, up, and we even have a little legend that reminds us the two high points correspond to these two promotion efforts. Here's a table across tabs showing month and sales channel. We get all the detail here, but down here we have two perfect charts in Excel that articulate a crosstab. Here we can clearly compare sales channel within each month. Over here we can compare the months, and then within the months compare the sales channel. Sometimes we mix our tables, numbers, and visualizations. We definitely want a table with all the detail, but look at this. We visualize top 3 using conditional formatting. Over here, we still get the immediate impact of our visualization, but we also have some of the detail. Now, rules for effective visualization. Eliminate extraneous elements in your visualization that do not help to deliver your message. Now, there's a guy named Edward Tufte. He's a world-renowned visualization expert, and he created the golden rule for effective visualization. There's actually 2 parts. The first part is data ink ratio should be high. Here we have lots of data and less ink. Over here we have the same amount of data, but lots of ink. That lots of ink gets in the way of delivering an effective message. Too many lines. The different colors probably don't help the message, and this is messy. We need to have the same number of digits for all the numbers in our table. All right, so data ink ratio should be high. The second rule is no chart junk. That is junk. This is simple and to the point. Yes, Microsoft has always offered these 3D, but what does it do? It distorts the proportions. We don't need all this crazy color. We don't need warm colors pushing this out and cool colors pushing it back. We don't need all this clutter. And look at this, unnecessary repetition. If we have the names here, I don't want them also in a second location. Over here, we get a quick visual impression with the names of the products. And over here, if we want to estimate what the number is, we have our numbers in thousands. Now, here's a chart I just saw this morning online at a news website. The heights of the column represent job approval rating. And I kind of like that. Since the article is about the current percentage, they put just one data point at the top. Well, look at this down here. This is kind of inconsistent. Sometimes we have the whole month. Sometimes we have a 3-letter or a 4-letter abbreviation. We probably want to be consistent. Also, since they're diagonal, it adds a certain busyness. We might convert these to 3 letters and align them vertically. Now we're going to start on the sheet T, and we want to talk about table design principles. We mentioned data ink ratio should be high. Horizontal lines are generally necessary only for separating column titles from data values. We can see that rule in action. Sometimes we use lines when we indicate that a calculation has taken place, like at the bottom for our column total. In large tables, light shading can be used to differentiate columns. For example, here's a finished solution for one of your homework problems. Numbers should be aligned right. Text left. All numbers should have the same number of digits. You could see up here we violated that rule. Something so amazingly common in the business world. It always amazes me. People love to center everything. We don't want to do that. Text to the left, numbers to the right. And we definitely don't want all the messy decimals. We want to keep it neat. Units must be indicated either with number formatting or labels. Here we didn't want to clutter it up with all the dollar signs, so we indicate up at the top. And then large numbers may be rounded to the thousands, millions, or billions. We can see over here these numbers have been rounded to the millions, and it's indicated at the top of the column. Now on the sheet T, let's scroll down. And we want to learn a few cool tricks for formatting. The first thing is we need to remove all the formatting. Home. Editing group, there's this awesome eraser button, Clear. Clear All would remove all the content, like delete, and the formatting. What we want is the second one, Clear Formats. Now, this is such a common command, it's worth learning the keyboards. Now, this keyboard is from earlier versions of Excel before the ribbon, and this is the one after. It is 4 different clicks in succession, so you can pick the one you want. Alt-EAF. So that's how quick it is when you know the keyboard. Now we want to add some light fill, and I'm going to highlight a row above and a column to the side and below. Home Ribbon tab, right-click, uncollapse. From the paint bucket, I'll select a light color. Now let's try some number formatting to get the same number of decimals. We could use drop-down. We could use the dialog launcher. Or we can use the keyboard, Control-1, to open up format cells. I'd like number, comma, 0 decimals. Click OK. Already looking much neater. Now, what are we going to do about these? Well, we can indicate the percentage at the top, but then I need to convert the underlying number. Instead of a decimal, I need it 6.41. Here's a great trick. You can type the number 100 into a cell, Control-C to copy that cell, highlight the numbers, right-click, and here it is, Paste Special. This dialog box will allow us to do an operation with that copied number on the selected numbers. So I'm going to say, hey, multiply. Now, if I click OK, it'll multiply, but it will remove the formatting. So I'm going to say, please, values only. Those two together, when I click OK, convert the underlying number to a different number. Now, I would never do this trick if I was ever going to use those in calculations, because I fundamentally changed the number. But as a final report, that is a great trick. Now, we need bottom border, so I'm going to highlight the column headers. Up here, first one, bottom border. Now, the column width, I'm going to try and select all the columns from C all the way to H. And by changing one, I will change them all. I'm making sure that I didn't cut anything off. Maybe I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Just boop. Now we have our finished table. Now we may want it on this sheet. We may want to put it into a Word document or a PowerPoint. And I got to show you a great trick. I'm going to highlight Control C. Now I opened up a Word document, but the same trick will work in PowerPoint. Up to the clipboard, paste. And there it is, Paste Special. Now this is the Paste Special dialog box. There was a button up there for picture. Here's the picture right here. But if you want it linked, that means if you select that, if you change it over in Excel, it will update here. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to paste it as a picture. Click OK. Now I'm going to click Escape to turn the dancing ants off. Oftentimes we want to print reports like this. That's where Page Setup comes in. Now we can go to Page Layout, Page Setup, and Dialog Launcher, or you can use the keyboard, Alt-PSP. This is definitely wider than it is tall, so I'm doing Landscape. I don't know exactly how big it's going to be. I may have to come back and change this later. Margins, you can adjust them here. I generally just say horizontal. Header or footer. There's some great options for printing. I'm going to go not to the drop down, but that's a great one there if you have lots of pages. Page 1 of question mark. I want to go to Custom Footer. And these icons here and the screen tips that pop up offer up a bunch of good footer options. In the center, I'm going to say Date, Space, Dash, Space. And look at that. I want the Sheet tab name. Click OK. Now, Sheet, we want the print area to be forced only to this range. And now we want to click OK. Now, if we Control P, look at that. I can see page 1 of 2. I need to reduce the size. We can go to the Page Setup dialog box from Page Preview. I'm going to say Fit to 1 page wide by 1 page tall. Click OK. And there we go. Table formatting rules, including pasting as a picture and page setup. Now let's go over to our next sheet, CF. Now we already saw last video how to create this amazing cross-tab pivot table report with just a few clicks. But now we want to add some visualization to show the top 5 numbers in green. Now this is a pivot table, so we can either highlight exactly the numbers we want, or we can select a single cell because it's a pivot table object. And conditional formatting is Home Ribbon tab, Style Group, and there it is, conditional formatting, the drop down. And there are a bunch of built-in features that are just amazing. The one we want is top bottom rules, and we want top 10 items. Now that's the default formatting. We'll fix that. Down, 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 because we only want 5. Click the drop down, and here's the one where you have all the options. Click. This is the Format Cells dialog box. Anything we do in this dialog box will be applied, but only when it's true that the number in the table is in the top 5. I'm going to do Fill Green. That's pretty dark, so now I'm going to go over to Font. Font color white, and I'm going to add bold. Click OK. Now when I click OK, what happened? Well, this is different than formatting just in the cells. This is a pivot table. So this smart tag will pop up. Hover your cursor, click the drop-down arrow, and look at this. There's our AND logical test that we learned last video. This is summing the sales for the column month and the sales channel column. So when I click that, instantly I get my conditional formatting. Now we'll add some data to this data set in just a second. I'm going to collapse this. For our second conditional formatting example, we want to create a heat map. That means it's going to, when I click the button, add some formatting. The top third, biggest numbers will be blue. The numbers that are in the middle will be white, and the smallest numbers will be red. Click in a single cell, conditional formatting, color scales. I'm going to select this one right here. Hover my cursor, click, and I'll use the AND logical test. That means internally inside the pivot table, not the totals around the outside. And that is a beautiful way to visualize. Clearly, we can see website sales and in-store sales have the 2 biggest ones because they're blue, and poor email coupons. They're stuck with most of the red. Now, there is some hidden data between G and N, so I'm going to click the grouping button very carefully. I'm going to select one cell, and notice there's an empty cell because I do not want to copy the field names. But click in one cell, and we're going to use Control asterisk. That's either asterisk on the number pad or Control Shift 8. That will always select the current table or the current range. Control C. Very carefully, I'm going to click in the date column. Control down arrow to jump down to the last date in the last record. click directly below. And now when I Control V, the new records are incorporated into the table object. Control up arrow. And now I'm going to uncollapse, scroll over, and we have our cross tab showing top 5 in green and our cross tab showing our heat map. Now we can refresh. Right click, refresh. And look at that. Not only do we get new months, but our conditional formatting updates showing the top 5 in green. Over here, our heat map updates. So conditional formatting, we did top 5 in heat map. A great way to visualize the numbers in a table. Now let's go over and we have to talk about column, bar, and pie. Now on this sheet, we already have a pivot table with product and amounts, and we want to compare these amounts across product. The perfect chart for that is the column or bar chart. Insert. And over in the chart group, we have a bunch of choices. We're going to point to the drop down for Insert Column. This is chart junk. We're going to either use the column or the bar. Now we have a choice between clustered and stacked. That only comes into play when you have more than one variable, like in our cross tab, which we'll do later in the video. So we're going to select the first one, clustered column. I click, we can point to the edge, and when we see our move cursor, we can click and drag. Now, anytime you have a visualization, you want to look at every element and ask, does it help deliver a message? Well, our goal is to compare the differences across the products. Well, the columns certainly help. The names certainly help. What about this right here? This is called a legend. This will help us when we have more than one series of numbers, but for us, we don't need it. So when I select it, I can use the delete key. These are called field buttons, and although you can use them to filter, most of the time we will have done our filtering inside the pivot table. And they're interchangeable. If I use it here or over here, it will filter both pivot table and pivot chart. Now I want to not display those field buttons. So up in the Pivot Chart Tools Analyze, I see field buttons. I'm going to say Hide All. The next chart element we want to look at are the horizontal grid lines. Most of the time we don't need them. It's just extra ink that doesn't help deliver the message. If it's important to be able to line up exactly whatever number we have over here in the vertical axis and the column, then we can keep them. I'm going to use the delete key. Well, that's looking better already. But we keep going through all the elements. Do we need a chart title? Well, certainly not with the word total. That doesn't help at all. Now, I do want a chart title, and I want it to say Win Sport Product Summer Sales with that $sign. Now, watch this. This is a great trick. Whereas these labels and the numbers are actually linked. So if something changes over here, it'll automatically update. This chart title will not. No problem. With the chart title selected on a solid line, I didn't click inside with a dotted line. I want to make sure it's solid. Then I can come up to the formula bar, type an equal sign, and that text is sitting in cell A1. So I select A1, and look at that. I'm linking a label in a chart to a formula. When I hit Enter, there's my chart title. Of course, if I change this, it totally updates. Control Z. Do we need these numbers in the vertical axis? Yeah, we need them. Do we need these words here? Definitely. That's the whole point to this chart. Now, both column, bar, and pie, they all do the same thing. We use these charts or visualizations to compare differences across categories. Quickly, I can see that quad is the biggest. Looks like Carlota is the second biggest. Research shows that the column and bar conveys differences across categories more effectively than the pie. And in fact, throughout history, the pie was used a lot. But in the last 5 to 10 years, the pie is out. Here's an example. Same exact data, but it's just too hard to tell the differences between the pie pieces. Much easier to tell the differences from column heights. Remember, the meaning of this is to compare differences quickly with a visual impression across our categories. Now, these are diagonal, and we talked about that chart we saw online where that makes it kind of busy. But I think we can still do better. Now, I want to copy the edge of this. Be sure with charts, sometimes it's hard if you're clicking around. If I copy and paste, it might not work. I want to click on the outside edge. So I see those round circles and nothing else selected. Control C. I come over to the side and Control V. Now I want to change the chart type. Pivot Chart Tools, Design. There's the button to change the chart type. Or we can come to the chart, right click, and there it is. I want to change the chart type. Over here we can see column, I want bar, and there we go. Click OK. Both charts do the same thing. We're comparing differences across categories. But the bar chart can do two things differently than the column chart. The first thing is it accommodates longer labels, listing them horizontally rather than diagonally. The second thing that a bar chart will do is it emphasizes the differences between the categories more forcefully than a column chart. And that makes sense because when we tilt this on its side, it's longer than it is taller. Now I'd like to change the gap width between the columns and make it smaller. Now I select the columns, and I'm going to use a keyboard. And guess what? If I'm in the cells and use the keyboard Control-1, it opens up Format Cells. If I'm in a chart and I have a certain chart element selected, when I use Control-1, it opens up the task pane. Now if I have different elements selected, this task pane will show different options for formatting that chart element. Now, one thing that's kind of tricky about the formatting task pane for charts is that sometimes it's hard to find things. These icons at the top, you can click and then look for what you want. You can use the triangles to open up and see other options. Now, I'm going to click on the series option, and what we want is gap width. I'm going to highlight and change this to 70, 70 and tab. Now, one thing you want to be careful is the only times you would have 0 gap width is when you have an upper and lower limit, like you're counting between 0 and 50, 50 and 100. Anytime you have categorical or qualitative variables like this, you do not want 0 gap width. But there we go. That is looking pretty good. Now I'd like to show you two options where we actually add numbers. Let's copy this chart, Control-C, and then below it I'm going to Control-V. Same thing over here. Select, Control-C, click in a cell below, Control-V. Now we'll scroll down. Now I'd like to add some numbers to the top of each column. Now we can add some elements and change some aspects of our chart using the task pane. But this green plus in the upper right of each chart allows us to add and remove chart elements. And I want to go down to data labels and simply check. And just like that, I have the numbers at the top of each column. Now there's a problem here because if I have numbers here and here, that's unnecessary repetition. So if you want them at the top, then we'll select the axis and delete. Now let's click on our bar. Let's close the task pane. There's that green plus. And this time, click that arrow and say inside N. Well, wait a second. The value difference between the font color and the fill color is not big enough. So I'm going to click once on the data labels. Up in the Home Ribbon tab, we'll use Font Color White. Now I click off to the side, and it looks pretty good, except for that one. Well, if I click on the data labels, it selects them all. If I click a second time, it selects just that one. And so now I can add a different formatting. I'll add black font. I can also use my Move cursor to click and drag. Click off to the side. That's looking pretty good, except for our chart junk. So I click on the horizontal axis and delete. We can also resize the chart if we'd like. Column and bar. The perfect chart when you want to compare differences across categories, not the pie. Now on the next sheet, CT Charts, we want to talk about a cross-tab chart. I'm going to click inside our cross-tab pivot table, Insert, over to Charts. And guess what? We use the same either clustered column or stacked column. We're going to start with a clustered column. And look at that. It displays two different columns with a unique list. Here's the month. Here's the sales channel. The clustered column puts the emphasis on the items in the legend because we're allowed for each month to compare each one of the items from the legend. 1, 2, 3 for June, 1, 2, 3 for July. Clearly, we can see website sales the biggest. For August, it was in-store sales. Now let's tighten up this chart. I want to remove the field button. So I come up, Pivot Table Tools, Analyze, Field Buttons, Hide All. I don't think I want the grid line, so I click and delete. Now let's click on the legend, Control 1 to open up the task pane. And because we had that particular element selected, the pane popped up with the options we want. Now again, that doesn't always work, so sometimes you really have to hunt around. But there it is. I want to select top. Now I want to go to my green plus, and I want to add a chart title. With the solid line, I come up to the formula bar, or I can simply hit the F2 key. That shoots my cursor up to the formula bar. I type an equal sign, click on the cell with my title. There it is. I hit Enter. Now let's scroll over a bit, and we want to compare and contrast this clustered column. Control C, click in a cell, Control V, right click, change chart type. And we want to compare it to stacked column. Click, click OK. And now we have the same exact data, the same two variables. There's our month, there's our legend. But now the emphasis isn't on the items in the legend. It's the items in the horizontal axis. Clearly, we can see amongst all of the months, June is the biggest, August is the second biggest. But we still have the ability with our second variable to compare within each month each of the sales channels. Stack column, the emphasis is on the horizontal axis variable. Clustered column, the emphasis is on the item in the legend. Now, if I copy, Control C, click below, Control V, right click. Change chart type. We want to come over to bar. Click OK. These two articulate a similar message. However, the bar will emphasize the differences between the categories more forcefully than the column chart. Click, Control C, down below, Control V. Right click, change chart type, bar. Click OK. So either column or bar, clustered or stacked column. These are the perfect charts when we have a crosstab and we want to visualize that report. All right, now we want to go over to the next sheet, line first. Now we're going to start off on this sheet and look at a couple simple examples. Then we'll look at a really cool line chart. Now line charts have one number on a vertical axis. For example, company sales. The line will go up and down, showing us the pattern or trend, and the category will be on the horizontal axis. In our case, quarter. So if I click in a single cell, insert, charts, not the scatter, we want the line. I'm going to use this one right here. Click on grid lines, delete. Click on the axis, Control 1. I want to start this at 500,000, so I come over to minimum. Highlight, type 500,000, and tab. That's just a simple example of a line chart showing the number variable going up and down across a category. We can have two numbers, but they will be two different series being plotted across this category. So I click in a single cell, insert, drop down for line, click on chart title, delete, horizontal lines, delete. And we can see with this example that we're definitely allowed from the legend to have two series numbers plotted against the same horizontal category. One last thing about line charts. Wow, this is a common chart. We want year on the horizontal and company sales as the line. So we click in a single cell, insert, charts, there's the line. And what? The chart totally interpreted this as a number that it should plot as a line. And that's not what we want. Now I'm going to delete the chart title and the horizontal lines. And here's the number one trick for charts. The charts will not always guess right or interpret what you want. Also, sometimes we may want to add new series of numbers to our chart. So the trick is up in Chart Tools, Design, there it is, Select Data. Or I simply right-click, Select Data. This Select Data is the real power. We can add new series of numbers. We can edit. We can remove. In our case, I want to select year and remove. Here we want to edit and add the correct years. So I highlight the numbers, click OK. Select data source. This is the real power. If you have trouble, come here, add, edit, remove, or edit the horizontal axis. Click OK. All right, now let's go over to the sheet line. Now we want to build that line chart we saw at the beginning of the video. Here's our data set. We went ahead and created a pivot table, adding week down to rows, revenue down to values. There it is, week, sum of revenue. Now we want to add a line chart. So I click in a single cell, insert. There's our line. That's looking pretty good. I want to click on the title. And this time, instead of linking it to a cell, I'm just going to start typing. And as soon as I start typing, it shoots me up to the formula bar. Then when I hit Enter, now I've typed a title in. I want to remove these field buttons, hide all. Now we'll delete the grid lines. That legend we'll deal with that later. Currently, as it sits, it's chart junk. Down here, what are these numbers? Anytime you have a chart and there's some numbers in the axis, it better be obvious what this number means. Up here we have sales, so we can imply that these are the sales. But down here, we definitely need to come up to our green plus, axis titles, click primary horizontal. Now I see the solid line. I type an equal sign. That shoots me up to the formula bar. I'm going to select week inside the pivot table. And when I hit Enter, now I have the variable that informs the viewer of what these numbers mean. Now that line chart is pretty good. It shows us for these weeks and these weeks, wow, sales were high. Now what I would like is I would like to inform the viewer of why we think these sales are high. I can see these numbers in the pivot table, and actually they correspond perfectly to some promotions we did. And our data set has for a particular sale whether it was part of a promotion. Now I want to highlight the D column all the way to G. You can see there's some hidden columns, so right-click, unhide. Now this column here represents all the numbers. That's how the line chart got drawn. But I only want numbers for those particular promotions for only a certain number of weeks. Now, the way we do this in charts is I need a column, a separate column that I can add to this chart. I need this column just for Festival of Flight, right here and here and here, to show these numbers. But the rest of them, I don't want them to show up in the chart. Now, the way charts look at columns is if they see a number, they plot it. But if we have a not available, and in Excel there's a not available function, that's the trigger to tell the chart that that particular line or item shouldn't be included. Now, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to summarize and add these to the pivot table. But the same thing will happen over here. NAs will not be plotted by the chart. So you ready? We're going to put one of two things into the column. Either, for this record, the actual number, or when it's not the promotion, NA. And the way we put one of two things into a formula is with the if function. So I'm going to create a logical test. If, as a relative cell reference, that promotion item is equal to Festival of Flight, and I need to lock this with the F4 key. If that's true, then please put the number in this column as a relative cell reference. Otherwise, for the value if false, we put NA, close parentheses. That formula will work. Control-Enter, double-click, and send it down. And we have just what we want. The pivot table and the line chart will interpret NAs and the numbers for the promotion correctly. Now we have to do this also for the fall kite event. So we look at the promotion column. Are you equal to fall kite event? F4, comma, if that's true, I want the number, comma, otherwise, please show NA. Control-Enter, double-click, and send it down. Now we're going to move this over to the side because the pivot table, when we click inside, we want to add these two columns. Festival of Flight, I drag it down to values. And just like that, well, wait a second, count. Right when it saw that NA, it actually didn't work. But no problem, right-click. We can change the summary calculation to sum. And there we go. That is beautiful. All the NAs. Oh, we already see a preview over here. These are all the NAs. But just between the 4 weeks when we ran that promotion, those 4 numbers show up in our chart. Not only that, but look at that. We have an informative legend that says that's part of the promotion. Fall kite event, down to values. Right-click, summarize values by sum. Now I'm going to hide these 2 columns. Click M and N, right-click, hide. I can move the chart, extend the edge. Click on the legend, Control-1, top. Let's click on the line. I want this to be bright red. Over in Format Data Series, there's the paint bucket. There's the line. We'll change it to red. Let's select fall kite event. We'll make this blue. And I'll select the full line for revenue, and we'll change this to green. Now I'd like to change the labels here. So I'm going to highlight L and O, right-click, unhide. Click in the pivot table column header, and I want to remove some of, delete. Same over here, delete. Select, hide. And now our chart is looking awesome. We have the pattern or trend for our revenue and an indicator for our 2 promotions. All right, our last visualization is the XY scatter chart. Now on the sheet XY, we have an X and Y variable. We want to look at 2 variables and see if there's a relationship. Now there's lots of mathematical and statistical techniques, but all we want to look at is the visual technique. We click in a single cell, insert, charts, and there's the dropdown for XY. Now our example, we've collected data, so we use the marker version. But if you have a model like a fixed cost, variable cost model, then you use the one with the lines. We're going to use scatter. Now the first problem is we do not have our variable labels. Green plus, axis titles. This is the Y, equal sign. Click on test score and enter. Click equal sign. There's the X and enter. Click on vertical, delete. Click on horizontal, delete. Click on the title, equal sign. Click on F1 and enter. And now we can see very quickly we have a visualization that asks the question, is there a relationship between hours studied and test score? Well, it does look like as we increase the number of hours studied, it does look like the test score goes up. All right, so that's a bunch about different chart types, when to use them, and how to use them. Now we want to go over and look at our finale to this video, our dashboard example. Let's click on CS for customer service data. Chantel Washington is a manager, and she's tracking customer service encounters. And here's the data set she's keeping. Each one of these rows is a record for her customer encounter. Some of the columns we're interested in for a dashboard: day of the week, time, the topic of the meeting type, and the duration of the meeting. If we go over here, these are the goals that Chantel has for this dashboard. Chantel Washington is a manager who works at a large hardware and lumber store with many customer accounts. However, customer service is not part of her main duty. She wants to document the excess customer service duties she is performing. And she wants to do this by building a dashboard with a number of tables and charts. She wants a quick visual impression of the frequency of customer contact by hour and by day. And she wants the specific counts for topics of meeting, counts of meeting type as a percentage, and the average meeting duration. Chantel also wants to have the dashboard update easily when she adds new records, and she wants to be able to print out this dashboard about once a week. All right, we're going to go to the data sheet. We're going to build some pivot tables and charts here, and then depending on whether we want both a pivot or chart, we'll move them or copy them and place them over here in the dashboard. So we'll start over in our customer service table. I'm going to click in a single cell, and I guess we'll build the frequency by day of week first. Insert pivot table, or as we learned last video, the keyboard is Alt and V. We want it on an existing sheet, location. Bill DB. Location will be cell A4. Click OK. Day of week down to rows. Now we could drag day of week to count, but I want it to say count of customer, so I'm going to drag customer. Remember, any field drag down that's text will just count how many times the particular row label criteria occurred in the data set. So we can see that Wednesday was 27, Sunday 1, Saturday 2. Now we're not going to use this table of data in the dashboard. We're going to make a chart. But for all 4 of the pivot tables we're going to create, I want to show you how to add a custom style up in design for our pivot tables. A couple of these pivot tables will be used in the dashboard, and I want the pivot table to follow our table formatting guidelines. So up in Pivot Table Tools Design, click the More button, and down here, New Pivot Table Style. We're definitely going to name this. I called it Pivot Table Following Table Rules. Now, for each one of the elements in our pivot table, you can click the Format button and add formatting. Now, there's a lot of elements here, but we're going to keep it simple. So whole table, Format. Over to Fill. I'm going to select white because I don't ever want to see these gray lines. Click OK. So we have one element where we've used Format. Now we'll go down to the header row. That's this row right here. Format. We'll use a light blue. And I want to follow our table rules where the headers have a border at the bottom. Click. Also under Font, let's add bold. Click OK. We can scroll down. Grand total. Format. For the totals, we want a border, a thin line at the top. That's going to say there's some calculation on the numbers above. Double line, that's at the bottom to indicate that this is the final number. Over to Font. Bold. Click OK. Now, you can play around with the rest of these, but these simple bits of formatting will follow our table rule. Click OK. It doesn't apply it immediately. We have to come back up to More. And there, if we hover, we can see our style. Now, guess what? Right-click. You can modify this anytime, and all the pivot tables in the Excel workbook will update. And what I want to do is I want to set this as the default pivot table style. So anytime we create a new pivot table, this style will be used. Click OK. Now I want to go back over to the data set, and we're going to use our keyboard Alt-N-V. And I want to put it on that same sheet, Build Dashboard. And this one's going to be in cell D4. Click OK. Rounded time down to rows. We get a unique list of our hours. Same thing, I'm going to drag customer because I want it to say count of customer. And look at that. The default style we created is now applied to any new pivot table. Back over to our data set. Alt-N-V, existing, click location, build dashboard. Scroll over. I'm going to put this in G4. Click OK. We want a count of topic meeting. So I'm going to drag it down to rows. There's our unique list. Topic of meeting down to values. There's our count. Now I want to sort this. So right-click, sort. I want to see the biggest on top, Z to A. New account is the number 1 topic. Legal issue number 15. Compromise account issue, and so on. That will be one of the tables we actually use in our final dashboard. Back over to CS Data, Alt-N-V, existing, location, build DB. Let's say J4. Click OK. Now here, this is the one where we want some calculations based on the meeting type. So we get a unique list, either email, meeting, office, phone. I'm going to drag meeting type down to values. It defaults to count. We could leave it like that, but she said she wanted %. Right-click. Show values as % of column total. 43% in the office, 38% by email, 18% by phone. Now we're going to drag duration down to values. Right-click, and we want average. So the aggregate calculation will be average. Right-click, number formatting. Something like number, 2 decimals, click OK. Now I want to add some wrap text, so I'm going to select those cells. Home ribbon tab, wrap text. Select K and L. Click and drag to make them the same width. I'm going to do the same over here, wrap text. And now change the column width. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 pivot tables. These two have detailed numbers that we want in our dashboard, but these two frequency distribution counting customer encounters by day and hour, we want to visualize these. So the perfect chart to visualize differences across categories is either column or bar. All right, this is a pivot table. I'm going to click in a single cell, Insert, over to Charts. Click the drop down for column, and there it is. I'm going to choose a bar. Horizontal bars tend to emphasize the differences between the categories better. All right, I want to remove those field buttons. Field buttons, hide all. We only have one series of numbers, so this is chart junk. I'm going to select and delete. Select the grid lines, delete. Let's select the title. Equal sign shoots me up to the formula bar. Select cell A1 and enter. Let's resize it. Point to the corner, click and drag. I'm going to move the chart. Select the columns. We use Control-1 to open up our task pane. And I want to change the gap width. I'm going to try 50 as the gap width and tab. Now I'd like to not have this axis, so I click delete. Let's put the actual numbers because we want some detail in our visualization. So come up to the green plus, data labels, arrow, inside end. Now we will select the data labels, click once, home ribbon tab. I'm going to choose white font. And there we have our count of number of customer service encounters by day. Actually, this isn't by day. I clicked on the wrong cell. No problem. I click on the chart up in the formula bar, highlight the formula, equal sign, and this one is D4 and enter. There we go. We have the right hour, not day. Now, I actually want to use this exact chart, but over here for count by day. So very carefully, in the white area off to the side, right click. And there it is. We can save this formatted chart as a template. Now it's going to save it to a folder that will allow this chart to show up in our Insert Ribbon tab. I'm going to give it a smart name. I called it Chantel W Chart. Click Save. Now let's click inside our pivot table for count of customer by day. Insert, Chart. And we're going to use our dialog launcher. Click. Over here on the left, there's templates. And there it is, Chantel W Chart. Click. Click OK. Let's resize it. Uh-oh. It looks like the chart title is missing. But guess what? We connected this to a cell. That's a formula. The chart title is still there. And in fact, if you click the green plus, you can see it's there. So watch this. It's temporarily invisible, but it is there. Up in our context-sensitive ribbon, I want Format, Current Selection, and there's a drop-down with all the different elements in our chart. I want to select Chart Title. Oh, there it is. Now, equal sign, and I think this one gets cell A1 and Enter. Now, it looks like this label down here, if I select it, I can't see it. Notice when I select it once, it highlights them all. But if I click it a second time, I can format just this one label. Up to the Home Ribbon tab, font black. I can use my Move cursor to move it. Now, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. We want to take these 4 elements and move them over to the dashboard. Now, the first element we want to move is topic of meeting, highlight, Control X. Over on the dashboard sheet, I've already created a label at the top, but I'm going to try and paste this one in E23, Control V, back over to Build, select the second pivot table, Control X. Over on the dashboard, let's see, H30, Control V. Back over to the dashboard. I'm going to select both charts. Select the first one, hold Control, click on the second one, Control X, dashboard, somewhere up here, Control V. Click off to the side. I'm going to move this one, and we will try and fit our first bar chart. Now, there's a great trick when trying to either size or move charts. If I hold the Alt key, it jumps so that it lines up everything with columns and row. So holding Alt, I want it to be lined up with E and the bottom of 3. Now we can do the same thing for sizing. I hold Alt, click, and there we go. I've lined it up with G. I'm going to move this holding Alt, and I move it up right there. This one I'm going to select and size it again using Alt, because I actually want it lined up with between F and G. Very carefully down at the bottom, Alt and click. So it looks like it's lined up. Looks like that one label. I'm going to click once and twice. Change it to black, move it out. Now our next task is I want this label at the top to have the earliest and latest date from our data set. To do that, we're going to create a text formula up here. But we first need to extract from CS data the earliest and latest date. Well, we can use the min function. Come down to CS data, and we want to click on the sheet. This is the date column. I hover my cursor at the top, and when I see my black downward pointing arrow, I click. I can see up in the formula bar, it puts the table name and in square brackets the field name, close parentheses, and enter. We'll do the same for the max using the max function. Click on the sheet. At the top of the column, click, close parentheses, and enter. Now, when we add new dates to our data set, these dates will update. And I want the label at the top to also update. So select E2 and F2 to put it in edit mode. And we're going to convert this to a text formula. Equal sign, double quotes, and at the end, I'm going to type a space and then a double quote. And now I want to join this so that it'll say Chantel Customer Service Encounters from, and we'll click on the begin date. Now let's just enter this and see what happens. And just as we studied in video number 1, dates and time use number formatting, and formulas cannot see that number formatting. So that's the underlined date and time value. No problem. F2, there's a special function that takes numbers, and for text formulas, it will add the specified number formatting. The name of the function is text. It takes a value, which is some number, comma, and then you have to give it the custom number formatting. Now, custom number formatting is complicated, except for date number formatting. So double quote, M/D/YY, and double quote. And that custom number formatting inside of our text formula will format that number. Close parentheses and enter. That is looking good. F2. Now we want to join using the join symbol, the word to in double quotes, and then we'll join it. And we'll use the text function again on the max date, comma, in double quotes, the custom number formatting, end double quote, close parentheses, and enter. And so this label becomes part of our dashboard. And when we add new records, it will totally update. Now, Chantel wanted the ability to print this out. If we do Control P to open up Print Preview, I can see that it's not all on one page. Down here, I can see page 1 of 2. So we need to do Page Setup. Up in Layout, Page Setup, we can use this dialog launcher, or we can use the keyboard, Alt-PSP. We want it portrait, and we want to fit it to 1 page wide by 1 page tall. Margins, we'll do horizontal. Header and footer. Down here is the preview of the footer. We don't have any footer. We could use the built-in drop-down, but we don't want to do that. We want to build our own custom footer. In the center region, I want to use the code for today's date. So I click on Insert Date. Every time we print this out, that code says put today's date. Space dash space. And I'm going to use the code that will always put the sheet name in. Click. That will be our footer. Click OK. On the Sheet tab, we want to define the print area. Very carefully from D1 all the way to K35. Now when we click OK and Control P to check Print Preview, that is looking awesome. Escape. Now the last thing is we want to test our solution. Go back over to CS Data, click in the Date column, Control down arrow. And when I scroll down a little bit, we're going to add new records. And we want to check to see if everything updates. Highlight, Control C. Below the Excel table, Control V. The new records are incorporated into the table. Now we come over to our dashboard. And up in Data, I want to click Refresh All. And just like that, everything is updated. We have a 3 on Saturday now. Wow, a much bigger meeting in office average. And Chantel is happy because now she can simply Control P and print out her new dashboard with her new useful information. All right, that was an epic video. We talked all about chart junk. We talked about our table design principles. We learned how to do conditional formatting for visualizing. We talked about how column and bars are much better for visualizing than the pie chart. We looked at our cross-tab charts. We learned how to do this amazing line chart. We talked briefly about the XY scatter, and then we ended it with Chantel's dashboard. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excelisfun, including EDAB number 6. We'll learn about the amazing Power Query. All right, we'll see you next video.